My true story from Tennessee Vay said, "You eat, but don't help." So I cooked my last dinner and then sold the kitchen, the house, and the property line under their feet. "You're just a mouth to feed, Ma." That was the first thing my son said as I set the roast chicken on the table. No thank you, no helping hands, just that. Like I was a stray dog waiting for scraps. He didn't even look up from his phone. Then his wife chimed in, spearing a biscuit like it had offended her. "Honestly, what? You're as useless as your walker. You sit in that chair, you eat our food, and that's about it." I didn't say a word. Not right away. I placed the mashed potatoes next to the green beans and sat down at the far end of the table, the same seat I had used since my husband Robert died 7 years ago. My hands ached from peeling, seasoning, and kneading, but that ache didn't compare to the one blooming in my chest. "You could at least wash the dishes sometimes," Stark added, "or fold a towel. Just something." Their son Charlie, all of 14, picked at the cornbread and muttered, "This tastes like cardboard." His sister giggled. "You too?" Jennifer snapped at them. But it wasn't real scolding. It was a theater like everything else at this table. I looked at my hands, wrinkled, speckled, but still strong. These hands had built birthday cakes, stitched Halloween costumes, wiped tears, signed mortgage checks. These hands had once held Jennifer's feverish forehead and spoon-fed Stark when he had surgery. But now they were just hands that served, hands that were expected to disappear after the dishes were cleared. "I raised you," I said softly. Jennifer didn't even pause as she reached for the salt. "Yeah. And now it's our turn. You had your time. Things change." Stark reached for another piece of chicken. "This house is ours now, Ma. You live here. You eat here. But this isn't your domain anymore." My mouth was dry, but I forced the words out. "I signed it over to help you. When Robert passed, and we appreciate it," Jennifer cut in sharply. "But appreciation doesn't mean we have to keep acting like you're still running the show." The room went quiet for a second, only the clinking of forks, the slurp of a soda can. I looked at them, really looked at them. Jennifer, my daughter, the girl who once painted my toenails blue and cried when her goldfish died, now wears her exhaustion like a weapon. Stark, who used to call me Ma with affection, now only did it when he wanted to shame me. Their kids looked through me like I was scenery. Something cracked. Not loudly, not even visibly, but deep inside. I had buried my husband, buried 2 siblings, buried pride and pain, and years of deferred dreams to raise this family. And this was what I had to show for it. A seat at the far end of a table where no one saw me anymore. "Don't forget dessert," Jennifer said brightly. "You made that peach cobbler, right?" I nodded. As they ate, I chewed slowly, watching them. They didn't know that the peaches were the last from the old tree Robert planted in 1972. They didn't know I had almost cut myself slicing them because my hands trembled, not from age, but from fury. They didn't know that I had spent all morning thinking about how people disappear while still breathing. After dinner, I did the dishes alone. No one offered to help. They turned on the TV in the living room, something loud and forgettable. When I was done, I went to my room, the one they had moved me into after renovating the master suite for themselves, and sat at the edge of the bed. There were photos on the dresser. Me and Robert at Niagara Falls, Jennifer holding her first report card, Stark on one knee proposing to her under the sycamore tree in the yard. I picked up a pen, opened my old planner, the one no one knew I still kept, and wrote 2 words. Final dinner. The plan wasn't clear yet, but the seed had been planted. Because if I was just a mouth to feed, then I would feed them one last time. And after that, I'd show them exactly how useful I still was. The house used to hum with life. When Robert was alive, every corner had purpose. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon or woodsome smoke, depending on the season. His boots sat by the back door, always dusty from the field. And the radio played old country ballads while I stirred stews or kneaded dough. We built this house plank by plank, room by room, scrimping and saving, painting walls late at night, arguing over curtain patterns and where to hang the family calendar. It was ours, and it was enough. We survived more than most. The drought of '86 nearly ruined us, but I cooked casseroles with canned beans and barter potatoes. The year the flu swept the county, I nursed Robert through it with vinegar cloths and whispered hymns, even as Jennifer coughed, so hard she bruised her ribs. When the flood came 2 winters later, I waded waist-deep in freezing water to pull Stark's stupid hunting dog off the back porch. I didn't flinch. I didn't quit. I once traded pies for propane, cleaned motel rooms in secret to keep the lights on, sold my mother's brooch, my last piece of jewelry, to buy textbooks when Jennifer failed her first college math course and threatened to drop out. And now they call me a burden. They sit in the house, my hands built, and say I don't help, that I cost too much, like I am an extra line item on a spreadsheet. Jennifer used to hold my hand and say, "Mom, you're the heart of this house. I remember that clearly." She said it on Christmas morning 2001, just after opening the quilt I'd spent all year making. Now she walks past me like I am furniture. It hurt at first. That quiet betrayal, that cold shift from gratitude to annoyance. I told myself it was stress or parenting or work. But one night I overheard Stark talking to someone on the phone. He thought I was asleep. "She's not going to last much longer," he said. "We're doing all the heavy lifting. The house should already be ours outright." He didn't say my name, just she like I was already gone. That night, I opened the filing cabinet in my room and pulled out the property deed. Robert had added Jennifer's name after his second stroke. Said it was just in case, but he never removed mine. And he never touched the land documents, the ones we separated for tax reasons years ago. Those still had my name and mine alone. I didn't make a scene, I didn't cry, I started researching. By the next week, I had called the lawyer who handled our estate years ago. He was retired, but his daughter had taken over. I told her I wanted to explore asset realignment. Quietly, she listened. I didn't tell anyone. Not when I went into town to sign paperwork. Not when I created a small trust in Robert's name. Not when I moved the land under my name into an LLC. When I formed using a P.O. box and a maiden name no one in the family remembered. They thought I was sipping tea and forgetting where I put my keys, but I was drawing the line they would never see coming. Because this wasn't just a house, it was mine, and I had been the one who carried it through every storm. I knew something was wrong when the brochures started showing up. They were tucked between mail, slid under doors, left on my nightstand like bedtime reading. Peaceful Pines, Compassionate Senior Living, Golden Maple Care, where dignity meets comfort. I knew a sales pitch when I saw one. I also knew it meant one thing. They wanted me gone. Stark left one by the toaster. Jennifer tried to frame it gently like she always did when she was hiding a knife inside her smile. "Mom, I was just thinking, about options somewhere with help with other people your age. You mean a place with locks on the doors?" I asked, not looking up from my crossword. She blinked. "It's not like that." "Then why does the brochure say memory care wing in bold?" She didn't answer. Just picked it up and folded it in half like it hadn't meant anything. That night, I overheard them whispering in the kitchen. While I sat in the den pretending to nap, Jennifer spoke in hushed tones. "But the walls in this house don't forget sound. If we get her evaluated and they mark her as early stage, we can legally have her placed," she said. Stark added, "And once she's in, we can finally move forward. The renovations, the equity pull, it's time." They weren't even talking about me like a person anymore. Just logistics, like I was a mattress taking up space in the garage. The next morning, I started forgetting things on purpose. I poured orange juice into my cereal. Left the TV on all night. Called Stark by my brother's name. Shuffled slower. Looked confused. They started speaking more freely in front of me. Thought they were getting away with something. Meanwhile, I called up the old lawyer Robert and I had used years ago, while his daughter Sarah was her name now. Young, sharp, smart enough not to ask too many questions. I told her I wanted to transfer ownership of some non-essential assets. "I want to start with the kitchen," I said. "The kitchen," she repeated. I explained. The kitchen was technically an addition built on a separate slab after we refinanced years ago. The land beneath it was still deed under my name from the time we added the outdoor grill zone for Robert. It could be legally sectioned and sold off as a separate unit with the right paperwork. Sarah blinked, then smiled slowly. "That's bold. Bold is what you do when you're treated like you're already dead." Over the next 3 weeks, I moved carefully. I inventoried everything in the kitchen, every granite countertop, stainless steel appliance, every cabinet and fixture. I had the entire room professionally appraised under the name of a shell company Sarah helped me register, Heartland Heritage LLC. They thought I was watching reruns and knitting. In truth, I was deeding the kitchen they mocked my food in to a silent buyer looking to build boutique Airbnb spaces with vintage Southern charm, and it did not stop there. The slab foundation the kitchen sat on sold. The outdoor cooking patio Robert had laid brick by brick. Sold. The side entrance they used every day after work. Sold. By the end of it, every inch of space they took for granted had been peeled away legally, cleanly, while they planned where to send me. They wanted to throw me out. But I was still the one who signed the paper that made the house a home. And now I was signing it away piece by piece on my terms. I told them I wanted to cook something special. No takeout tonight, I said sweetly. Just come home on time. I'm making dinner old-fashioned from scratch. Jennifer looked surprised. Stark smirked. Well, this is new, he said. What's the occasion? No occasion, I said, smiling. Just a mother wanting to treat her family. One last good meal. I could see the relief in Jennifer's eyes. Maybe she thought I was softening, ready to be agreeable again. Maybe she thought I was giving up. The truth? I had never been more certain of myself. I started at sunrise. I made buttermilk biscuits with honey butter, roasted chicken seasoned the way Robert used to like it. Paprika, rosemary, garlic pressed into the skin, macaroni and cheese baked in the old ceramic dish, breadcrumbs crisped to gold, collarded greens cooked slow with smoked turkey necks, sweet corn pudding, and for dessert, peach cobbler still bubbling when they walked in. Dark was the first to say it. Wow. Jennifer gave a little gasp. It smells like childhood in here. Take a seat, I said. Everything's ready. We sat at the table just like we used to. For a moment, they looked like the family I remembered, laughing, teasing, the grandkids reaching for second helpings. Stark complimented the greens. Jennifer asked for the cobbler recipe. It was the kind of dinner I used to pray for back when they all still saw me as something other than a liability. You really outdid yourself, Ma, Stark said. I nodded. Well, it's a special night. I looked at him. You've done well for yourself, Stark. Smart with money, sharp dresser. People trust you. He grinned. I try. I turned to Jennifer. And you, my girl, you've got a real head for logistics. Always managing, always solving. Your father would be proud. She softened, maybe even blushed. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. The plates emptied, the wine was poured, and then, when dessert had been served, I folded my hands and looked around the table. Everyone enjoying their cobbler? I asked gently. They nodded, mouths full. I smiled. Well, I'm glad, because it's the last thing you'll ever eat from this kitchen. Jennifer blinked. What? Stark paused mid-bite. Excuse me? I set my fork down. This kitchen, I said, has been sold. The counters, the appliances, even the tile under your chairs, all of it, transferred, appraised, and claimed by a new owner. Silence. The land beneath this room no longer belongs to you. The foundation under your feet, not yours either. It was mine, and I sold it. Jennifer stood abruptly. What the hell are you talking about? I pulled out the papers from my apron pocket, crisp and notarized. I've spent the last few weeks handling what you two were too arrogant to imagine that the woman you dismissed, mocked, and tried to exile is still very much capable of outmaneuvering you. Stark grabbed the papers, his face drained as he scanned the signatures. This is real. Oh. Yes, I said. Heartland Heritage, LLC. That's the buyer. That's me. I leaned back in my chair. I hope the meal was worth it because tomorrow this kitchen won't be yours to enter. I laid the folder on the table like a final course. Not dessert, something heavier, the kind of truth that sours a full stomach and leaves nothing but silence behind. Stark snatched it before Jennifer could reach. He flipped through the documents with a nervous scoff that gave way to silence. His face drained of color the further he read. Jennifer leaned over his shoulder, her fingers tightening on the chair. What? What is this? What is this, Mom? I folded my hands. It is a legal record of sale, I said calmly. The kitchen, the fixtures, the slab foundation beneath it, sold. Stark barked out a laugh, but it sounded hollow. You're bluffing. This is just some paperwork. You don't have the right to do this. This house is in our names. Correction, I interrupted. Some of the house is. But not this room. Not the part we added when Robert got his bonus in '97. Remember, we filed that permit under my name and the land we extended the kitchen onto. That stayed under my name for tax reasons. All very tidy, all very legal. Jennifer looked up at me like she was seeing me for the first time. This isn't real, she said, voice sharp. You can't just sell the kitchen. I reached into the folder again and handed her a notarized page, title transfer stamped witnessed. And this I unfolded a second paper. Is the appraisal? You'll notice it's fair market value. I didn't cheat you, I just beat you. Stark's ears turned red. You're insane. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm tired of being erased, of being useful until I'm not of being fed, but not fed the truth. Jennifer slammed her palm on the table. What did you do with the money? I moved it into a trust, I said. Not for you, not for the grandkids, not for anyone at this table. It's for me and a little cottage where no one will tell me I'm a burden for making soup. Stark stood. This is theft. We'll challenge it. You'll lose, I replied. You're welcome to try. But every document is in order. I had time. You gave me plenty of that while you planned to ship me off. Jennifer's voice broke. You can't just tear this family apart. I looked around the table. The faces that once looked like home now twisted with greed and disbelief. I didn't tear it, I said. You cracked it the day you called me useless. I just decided not to patch it back up. And then I stood, walked out of my own kitchen, and left them sitting in the ruins of their entitlement, every brick beneath their feet. It had already found a better owner. The construction trucks arrived just after sunrise. Jennifer thought it was a mistake. Stark ran out in his slippers to wave them off, but the foreman handed them a clipboard and a copy of the deed with a calm, practiced nod. Just here to begin demarcation, he said. This section, kitchen through rear patio, is now under H. Heartland Heritage LLC, scheduled for renovation and build-out. They're tearing out our kitchen, Jennifer screamed from the porch. No, I said from the rocker. They're tearing out my kitchen. Your lease on it expired the moment you stopped seeing me as human. They stood frozen as tape was laid across the floor tiles. Bright orange spray paint marked new boundaries, lines that said, You own this hallway, but not that sink. Stark yelled about permits. Jennifer shouted about family, but the workers didn't flinch. They had the paperwork. Everything was official. When the saws started cutting into the countertop, Jennifer broke, You're destroying everything. I stood up, cane in hand, and walked toward them slowly. No, honey, I'm reclaiming what I built. They stared at me like I was the stranger. That night, they pored over deeds and maps, called lawyers, begged title offices. But it was true. All the major living spaces had been part of the post-97 expansion. The new roofline, the kitchen, the back garden, all mine. The only part they still legally shared was the front living room and 2 bedrooms, an empty shell. I sat on the back porch, sipping tea under a sky my husband once called heaven's shawl, and thought about something he told me years ago. Be careful, he'd warned after one of Jennifer's tantrums. When children are poor, they rely on their mothers. When they are rich, they want to kick them away. Be careful. Children lean on you when they're poor and push you out when they think they've made it. Back then, I laughed it off. Not anymore. 2 days later, they cornered me in what was left of the den. Mom, Jennifer began, please just cancel the sale. Well, do better. We didn't mean. Stark stepped in. We were just stressed. You caught us at our worst. I looked at them and smiled. You told me I eat, but do not help. I said quietly. Well, I helped. I helped you learn the cost of contempt. I leaned in closer, voice low and steady. You forgot something. I am not just your mother. I am the owner. And then I turned, walked out past the demo crews, and never looked back. The fallout came faster than I expected. 3 days after the construction crew marked the property lines, Stark stormed into a local credit union trying to refinance what was left of the house. The bank declined. The asset value had dropped too far. With half the structure under different ownership, it was no longer a viable equity source. Their renovations frozen, their loan applications rejected. Word spread quickly in town. Jennifer started blaming Stark for pushing too hard. Stark blamed Jennifer for not handling me better. The grandkids stopped coming downstairs. I heard yelling through the walls, blame flung like broken dishes. And then one morning, I packed 2 suitcases, handed the construction crew foreman my forwarding address, and left. I did not slam the door. I did not wave goodbye. I simply walked out of the hollow they had carved into my home and towards something of my own. I bought a small cottage up in the hills. Nothing fancy, just 3 rooms and a wide garden where the sun touches everything before noon. The air is cleaner there. The people are quieter. I planted marigolds in a row along the porch and herbs in hanging baskets. I built a tiny kitchen with open shelving and sunlight on the counters. Every dish I cook in that space reminds me that starting over does not mean starting from nothing. One afternoon, a local journalist knocked on my door. She had heard the story everyone had by then. The mother who sold the kitchen, the house that got split like a pie. She wanted to ask questions, write something human. I'm not looking for drama. She said just truth. I invited her in. We sat in the garden with iced tea. She asked about my children, about what I'd do differently, about whether I missed them. At the end, she looked me in the eye and said, If you could say one thing to them now, what would it be? I didn't even pause. I looked out over my marigolds and said, When you decided I was a burden, I became the lesson you would never forget. She didn't write anything for a moment. Then she whispered, "That might be the most honest thing I've ever heard." I smiled because it was. The kitchen was smaller, but it was mine. The cabinets creaked a little when I opened them, and the stove took longer to heat than I liked, but not a single soul muttered behind my back when I stirred the gravy too slowly. No one rearranged my spices or accused me of forgetting to close the fridge door. I kept a wall calendar like I always had, only now it was pinned in the hallway, where I passed it every morning. My blue ink scrolled across each square like a promise. You still have things to do. The pantry held what I liked: grits, cornmeal, raspberry preserves, coffee so strong it could strip paint. There was no one to tell me we were cutting back. No teenagers slamming cupboards in protest. I had peace, and that peace had a sound. The clink of ceramic mugs, the hum of the porch fan, the low, steady breath of a woman who had nothing to prove anymore. The money from the house sale, what was left after fees and taxes, sat untouched in a private account for 3 months. I didn't withdraw a dime. I just looked at the balance sometimes, not because I needed it, but because it reminded me that I had done something, that I had value, even when no one said so, that I could still leave a mark. But I didn't want that money to vanish with me. Not into ashes, not into a headstone. I wanted it to become something more. So I wrote a new will, the Robert E. Miller Memorial Scholarship Fund. That's what I named it. It wasn't grand. It wouldn't buy a Harvard education, but it would buy books. It would buy toolkits. It would buy gas for the kind of students who had dirt on their boots and questions in their eyes. 2, maybe 3 kids a year. The kind of kids Robert used to take chances on. The ones who fixed things with their hands, who didn't speak much but listened hard. I remember once years ago, Robert hired a young man who dropped out of high school but could rebuild a carburetor blindfold. "Give them a chance," Robert told me. "Most people just need someone to believe they can do more than survive." That's what the scholarship would be. Not survival money, belief money. When the attorney asked if I wanted to inform my family, I shook my head. "They'll find out," I said eventually. "Or maybe they won't. Either way, the name's on the website. That's all that matters." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Some nights, I sat on the porch and wondered if the grandkids remembered the garden. If they ever asked what happened, if they'd grown up thinking I was cold or crazy, or just another old woman who drifted away. But then I reminded myself I wasn't the one who walked away first. I was just the one who walked last. There were moments of ache when I made chicken soup and realized no one would call it bland. When I saw a toy in the aisle of the grocery store and almost reached for it before remembering no little feet would run through my house again. But I never missed the wait. The tension. The look in Jennifer's eyes that used to hold love and now held calculation. I filled the silence with purpose. I started keeping a journal, not of my feelings, but of what grew, what bloomed, what failed. I wrote down the first time my new neighbor, Mrs. Lambert, came by with a lemon pie and left with a jar of my pickles. I wrote the name of the birds that nested in the rosemary bush outside the kitchen window. I tracked rainfall and tea blends, and once wrote an entire page about how sunlight hits the floor differently after 4 p.m. And then came Daniel, the first scholarship recipient. His thank you letter came folded into a wrinkled envelope, hand-addressed and nearly torn at the seal. I unfolded it carefully, already prepared for formality or stiffness. "What I got instead was raw," he wrote. "I didn't think people like you still existed. My mom says everything's a scam. But your check cleared and the school said it's real. So now I get to take classes without worrying if the car will make it to campus. I never knew your husband, but I'll carry his name in my hands while I work. Thank you for believing in people like me." It wasn't perfect. Spelling errors, run-johns, smudges, but it was the most beautiful letter I had ever received. I framed it, hung it right next to the window over my sink. So every morning when I washed blueberries or filled the kettle, I saw it, saw that belief had a ripple. That legacy was louder than inheritance. One day a neighbor asked if I'd ever reconcile with my children. "Do you miss them?" she said gently, sipping tea. I thought about it for a moment. "I miss who they used to be," I answered. "But who they became? No, I don't miss being disposable." She nodded. Didn't press further. Later that week, I got a call from the local paper. A young reporter had heard about me, about the scholarship, the land sale, the story that had quietly become legend in our corner of Tennessee. She wanted to write a feature. "I just want to talk," she said. "Get your words down so it doesn't become someone else's version." We sat in the garden. I told her about Robert, about the farm, about the day the kitchen was sold without a single scream. She asked questions, took notes. At the end, she said, "If you could say one thing to your family, just one sentence, what would it be?" I looked around. The sun had started to lower behind the trees, painting everything gold. My marigolds were still open. The birds hadn't yet gone quiet. I turned to her and said, "When you decided I was a burden, I became the lesson you'd never forget." She wrote it down. That night I took a walk around the yard, flashlight in hand, checking the garden beds. I ran my fingers through the dirt, touched the petals, stood by the fence, and stared at the stars Robert used to point out with a calloused finger and a quiet awe. In this little corner of the world, I had no titles, no role to prove, no legacy to defend, just peace and plants and possibility. And then came the morning I remember best. The sun rose early, earlier than usual, painting my kitchen walls in a soft gold that looked almost holy. I poured myself a glass of iced tea, added lemon, walked barefoot to the porch, and let the quiet wrap itself around me. I passed the old mirror I'd hung by the door, a salvaged piece from the house I had once called home. It was slightly cracked in the corner, just enough to remind me that nothing is ever fully whole. But it still reflected. I looked at myself, wrinkled, sturdy, whole, and I whispered to my own reflection, not with anger, but with certainty. They thought I was a burden, but I have memories, and memory never dies. It started with a letter in the mail. Not from Jennifer, not from Stark, not from any court or bank. This one came from a journalist, an older woman named Claire, who said she had read the piece in the local paper and needed to see it with her own eyes. She didn't ask for an interview, she asked for tea. So I made a fresh batch of lemon balm and honey and waited on the porch. When she arrived, she brought a notebook, yes, but also a peach pie wrapped in a towel. "I don't want your story to end where others expect it to," she said. And I told her, "Good," because it doesn't. We sat together under the shade, and I told her about the kitchen, every tile, every spatula, every insult that fueled the sale. I told her about the marigolds, the scholarship's first student, and his rusty pickup truck that broke down halfway through the semester, but kept going because he believed someone believed in him. She asked about Jennifer. "She still sends cards," I said. "Not handwritten, not warm, just printed things. Happy holidays or hope you're well. The kind of mail you send a stranger who knows too much." Claire sipped her tea. Pen paused. "Do you ever answer?" I looked out at the ridge where the sun was climbing. "No, but I opened them just to see if she remembers how to say I'm sorry. So far she hasn't." Claire wrote something down, then closed the notebook. "You know," she said gently, "some people say revenge hardens the heart." I smiled. "Then they've never tried forgiveness that was never asked for." That article she wrote reached farther than either of us expected. A regional magazine reprinted it. Then a podcast read it aloud. Then an attorney from out of state contacted the Scholarship Foundation. He'd grown up in a house like mine with a grandmother like me and wanted to match the funds next year in full. More letters came after that from strangers, widows, veterans, caregivers. One woman wrote, "I watched my daughter sell my furniture while I was in the hospital. You reminded me that I am not crazy. I am still here." But nothing surprised me more than the knock on my door one Tuesday morning in late spring. I opened it to find Stark. Not Stark in a suit, not Stark with his jaw tight and eyes cold. This Stark had lines in his face I didn't remember, and hands that fidgeted with a ball cap. "May I come in?" he asked. I didn't answer. I stepped aside. He sat at my kitchen table, stared at the framed scholarship letter above the sink. He said nothing for a long time. "I ruined everything," he said finally. I stayed quiet. He swallowed. "You were right about all of it. Still, I said nothing." "My wife," he began, then stopped. "Jennifer, she says you've made her out to be a villain." "I didn't have to," I said gently. "She wrote that part herself." He nodded slowly. "I just came to say thank you for the food, for the years, for putting up with us longer than you should have." "Did she send you?" I asked. He looked down. "No. She doesn't know I'm here." I walked to the stove, poured us both tea, handed him a mug. "She'll be angry," he said. I sipped. "She already is." He chuckled softly. "You know, I used to tell myself we were helping you, that keeping you here, controlling things, that was protecting you. I thought you didn't know what was going on." "You hoped I didn't," I corrected. He met my eyes. "But you did. I always did," I said. "You just stopped listening." He stood to leave, but paused at the door. The house? It's different without the kitchen. I imagine it is. He turned to me, real sorrow on his face. If you ever want to see the kids, I'll let them find me if they want to, I said. On their own terms, without the lies. He nodded again, then left. I didn't cry after he left. Not out of coldness, just peace. I had already grieved that family once. I wouldn't do it twice. And yet, after that day, things changed. A month later, a handwritten envelope arrived. No printed font, no company seal. Inside, a card with a single sentence written in Jennifer's once familiar cursive. I didn't know what I was losing until the silence stayed longer than the noise. No apology, no plea, but something. A crack in the wall. I pinned it to my bulletin board next to a seed packet of Robert's favorite tomatoes. The scholarship grew. It gained donors. It funded its 5th student before year's end. One of them, a young woman named Elise, sent a photograph of her standing next to her welding machine, beaming, holding up her certificate. On the back, she wrote, "For every woman who was told to sit down and stay quiet, thank you for standing up instead." I put that photo in a frame too. Years passed. I aged, as we all do. My hands stiffened, my hair turned silver. I planted slower, read longer, moved like wind through tall grass, deliberate, quiet, impossible to catch. When my time came, I asked for no funeral, just a bench on the hill, with Robert's name on one side, mine on the other. I asked them to engrave this. We built something. When they tried to tear it down, she sold the blueprints and built again. I left my story behind, not just in documents, but in every dollar given to someone who needed a second chance. I left behind recipes, pressed flowers, my laughter sealed in jars of peach preserves, and I left behind a truth the world tried to bury. You can call her old, you can call her stubborn, but never ever call her finished. Because when a grandmother speaks, she does not whisper. She echoes. If this story reminded you of someone you love or someone you lost, then you already understand. It was never just about the house. It was never about a kitchen or a deed or even the title on a piece of paper. It was about dignity. It was about memory. It was about a woman who gave everything, her time, her tenderness, her whole back to build a life for the people she loved, only to be treated like an afterthought. Like her usefulness had an expiration date. And yet she stood. She stood up not with fists or fury, but with a pen, a plan, a memory sharper than every insult they whispered when they thought she wasn't listening. She remembered what they forgot. That silence is not weakness, that stillness is not surrender, and that when the world underestimates a woman who's carried others her whole life, it does so at its own peril. In the end, she didn't just walk away from what was taken. She walked into something better, something she built herself. And she did it with no applause, no spotlight, just the quiet confidence of a woman who knew her worth even when no one else seemed to. That is what Grandma True Stories is all about. Not fiction, not fantasy, but truth. The kind that lives in nursing homes, in secondhand kitchens, in birthday cards that never got mailed. Truth that waits decades before it finally says, "Now it's my turn to speak." If you believe the quietest women often carry the loudest truths, if you believe that justice doesn't need to shout to be heard, it just needs to arrive calm and clear, one signature at a time, then you're in the right place. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We tell what really happened, what they thought no one would ever find out, what they whispered when they believed she was too old, too tired, or too kind to fight back. But let me tell you something. When a grandma remembers, the world has to listen. And when she finally speaks, she doesn't raise her voice, she raises the truth.